never thought I'd be the kind of person to do something like this. If you had told me back then that I would cross a line I swore I never would, I would have laughed. But life has a way of blurring boundaries, making small choices seem harmless, until they aren't. College was a fresh start, but I wasn't alone in it. I had my boyfriend, the one person who felt like home. We had been together since high school, surviving distance, late-night calls, and visits whenever we could. It wasn't perfect, but we made it work. He trusted me completely, never questioned anything. Maybe that's what made it worse. Started small. A name that didn't mean anything at first. A guy from class, someone I saw a few times a week, someone I had no reason to think twice about. He wasn't my type, not in any obvious way. But he was easy to talk to, funny in a way that caught me off guard. He made long lectures bearable, turned study sessions into something I actually looked forward to. The first time I noticed something was different, I ignored it. A casual joke that made my stomach flip, a glance that lingered half a second too long. It wasn't flirting, not exactly. But it wasn't nothing either. I told myself I was overthinking. People are allowed to have friends, to laugh, to enjoy someone's company. It didn't mean anything. But then it started creeping into the spaces where it shouldn't be. I caught myself checking my phone, hoping for a message. I found excuses to stay back after class just a little longer. I started noticing the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for something. And the worst part, I liked it. One evening we ended up walking back to our dorms together. It was late, the campus quiet, the kind of night where everything feels a little too personal. We talked about things I hadn't said out loud in a long time. Dreams, regrets, whats. He listened in a way that made me feel important, like every word mattered. My boyfriend loved me, I knew that, but he didn't ask questions like this. He didn't make me feel like I was something to figure out, something worth unraveling. When we reached my building, I hesitated. Just for a second. He didn't move either. It would have been easy to brush it off, to say goodnight and go inside. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing between us. I broke the moment, made some excuse, went inside. My phone buzzed, my boyfriend asking if I was home safe. I stared at the screen, guilt settling in, but not enough to stop the thoughts racing through my mind. I should have walked away then. But I didn't. I started lying to myself before I ever lied to him. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendship that happened to mean a little more than it should. I convinced myself that as long as I didn't cross a physical line, it wasn't cheating. But deep down I knew. Every interaction became a test of restraint. The way he leaned in when he talked, the way our shoulders brushed when we walked together. Small, insignificant moments that shouldn't have mattered but did. I felt it every time. Pull, a quiet thrill. And yet I still told myself I was in control. It wasn't like I stopped loving my boyfriend. I still answered his calls, still told him I missed him. But there was a shift, something unspoken. He didn't notice, or maybe he trusted me too much to look for signs. I hated that. It made it worse somehow. Late-night conversations turned into inside jokes, messages that felt like secrets. We talked about everything but never what we both knew was happening. There was an unspoken rule between us. We didn't acknowledge what was building between us, because saying it out loud would make it real. The first real moment of weakness came when we were alone in his dorm, an innocent study session that had nothing to do with studying. We were talking about nothing and everything when he suddenly went quiet. His eyes met mine, searching, waiting. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He reached for my hand. Just that. A small, almost meaningless gesture. But it wasn't meaningless, and we both knew it. I could have pulled away, should have pulled away. Instead, I let it happen. The moment stretched too long, filled with everything we weren't saying. His thumb brushed over my skin, slow, deliberate. My breath caught. I should have left. I should have stood up, walked away, never looked back. But I didn't. I don't know how long we sat like that, trapped in something that had gone too far without ever needing words. Eventually I pulled my hand back, stood up too fast, made some excuse about needing to go. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't have to. Walking back to my dorm, my hands were still shaking. My phone vibrated, My boyfriend sending a goodnight text. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. Guilt maybe. Or regret. But not enough to make me stop. Because the worst part. I wanted more. The first time it happened I didn't plan it. That's what I told myself later. As if that made it better. As if pretending it wasn't a choice would erase the guilt. But it was a choice. Every moment leading up to it had been a choice, whether I wanted to admit it or not. It was late. We had both stayed behind after class, pretending we had work to finish. Neither of us acknowledged that we were just looking for an excuse. The air between us was heavier than usual, charged with something we had spent too long pretending wasn't there. He asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated too long before answering, and that hesitation was enough. He knew. Maybe he had always known. I didn't stop him when he closed the distance between us. I didn't pull away when his lips brushed against mine. Hesitant at first, then certain. The moment it happened, everything else faded. My boyfriend, my promises, the person I thought I was. None of it existed in that moment. When it was over, reality crashed down hard. The weight of what I had done settled deep in my chest. I felt sick, but not enough to undo it. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But I knew that was a lie before I even said it. The worst part wasn't just the act itself. It was how easy it had been. How natural it felt. That scared me more than anything. I went back to my dorm, showered, scrubbed my skin as if that could erase what had happened. My phone was full of unread messages. My boyfriend asking if I was okay, if I was still up. I stared at his name on the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to find the right words. I told him I loved him. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was still true. The next day I avoided him. Not my boyfriend, the other him. But it didn't matter. Avoiding him didn't change what had already happened. It didn't change the fact that I wanted it to happen again. And it did. I told myself it couldn't last. That eventually I'd have to make a choice. But I kept pushing it off, pretending I could live in both worlds without consequences. I was careful, at least I thought I was. I answered my boyfriend's calls, sent sweet messages, visited him on weekends like nothing had changed. But something had. And no matter how hard I tried to act normal, cracks started to show. I became distracted, distant. He noticed, even if he didn't say it right away. The guilt should have made me stop, but it didn't. Instead, it made me resentful, like I was punishing myself by staying in a relationship I had already betrayed. And if I was already the villain in this story, why stop now? It wasn't just physical anymore. It was the way I felt lighter around him, how I stopped filtering my thoughts, how I laughed in a way I hadn't in a long time. My real relationship started to feel like the act, while the affair felt like the truth. And that scared me. Then everything unraveled. My boyfriend found out, not because I told him but because the lies always catch up eventually. A missed call at the wrong time. Text I forgot to delete. A gut feeling he finally listened to. When he confronted me, I didn't even try to deny it. What was the point? He deserved the truth, even if it was too late. I expected him to yell, to demand an explanation. Instead, he just looked at me. Hurt, exhausted, like he was trying to understand how the person he loved had turned into a stranger. That look will haunt me for the rest of my life. He didn't stay to argue. He didn't ask for closure. He just walked away. And that was the moment it really hit me. I had destroyed something I could never get back. The other guy. He was never meant to be forever. Maybe he knew that too. When the excitement faded, when the secrecy lost its thrill, reality set in. We had built something on stolen moments and broken trust. There was no future in that. I was left alone, exactly where I had put myself. No excuses, no justifications, just the weight of my own choices. I don't know if I regret it. Maybe part of me always will. But I do know one thing. I won't make the same mistake again. Because once you cross that line, you don't just lose the person you love. You lose the version of yourself who would have never done it in the first place. And that's a loss you can't ever fix.